Hello, it's time for French Politics here on France 24. I'm Mark Perlman. Coming up on this week's show, violence on the streets of Paris overshadows the traditional Labor Day demonstrations. Also this week, a year after her defeat in the presidential election, far-right leader Marine Le Pen is training her sights on winning the European elections next year. And in the meantime, well, the French president is on the other side of the planet. The trade unions were hoping to flex their muscles on Labor Day to protest the government reforms and keep the momentum going for the railway and airline strikes that have been going on for weeks now. However, their plan fell through as the protests were marred by violent clashes in central Paris.
On the left, a McDonald's, torched by protesters at France's May Day marches. They also took aim at a Renault dealership, setting cars ablaze.
They looted all the computers, laptops. What do you want me to say? Look behind there. They left one of the cars behind. Look at this.
While some attacks against businesses seemed targeted, at many times the rioters just seemed to destroy anything in their path. According to French authorities, this was the work of the Black Bloc, a violent left-wing anarchist group. They tried to incite rioting and looting out of peaceful anti-government protests. Police had deployed 1,500 riot police to face what they thought would be only 400 to 800 violent protesters. In fact, they were matched almost 1 for 1.
There was a group of at least 1,200 Black Bloc members. These individuals, as the name implies, are people who dress up all in black, wear hoodies and face masks, and who protect themselves while they carry out their attacks.
Over 100 people are now in police custody, but opposition leaders say the response was insufficient.
This sack of Paris by far-left militias is unacceptable. They're galvanized by a permissive government. It's time to strike down these professional agitators.
From Australia, the French president gave his reaction.
From here, all I can do is once again condemn what happened in the strongest terms. There is no need to get unreasonably worried. It's just a matter of standing firm. There is a government, there is a state, and there are leaders who will continue to lead.
He's vowed to push ahead with his vast reforms despite the protests.
Well, as we just saw, the opposition has attacked the government for failing to anticipate the incidents, with some even calling for the resignation of the Interior Minister, Mr. Gérard Collomb. However, the incidents also took a more controversial turn when the far-left leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon claimed that the violence was in fact fomented by far-right groups. He fired a tweet saying, indeed, that far-right groups were behind the provocation. This, in turn, ignited a storm of criticism, and he eventually backpedaled, thus admitting that far-left and anarchist militants were probably the main culprits. Let's take a listen.
People preventing a May Day protest from taking place, well, they're probably fascists. When I got here, I saw indeed that it was something else. But that something else I want to condemn and explain what it is. This is no revolutionary action. No one can believe that smashing the windows of a McDonald's restaurant is revolutionary action. Revolutionary action is about raising awareness, getting millions of people together so they understand what's at stake. And right now, the big issue is that Emmanuel Macron is trying to change our social model.
Speaking of the far right, it traditionally holds a march in Paris to honor Joan of Arc. But this year, its leader Marine Le Pen decided that she wanted a change. So she chose the southern city of Nice, a traditional National Front stronghold, and she hosted a meeting of far-right party leaders from across Europe, as she is hoping to capitalize on the gain made by nationalists across the continent in next year's European Parliament elections.
It's long been a tradition for France's far-right National Front laying a wreath at a statue to nationalist icon Joan of Arc on May Day. Tuesday's move came in the southern town of Cannes, ahead of a meeting of European far-right representatives in neighbouring Nice.
Very clearly today, across Europe, there's a powerful upswing of a revolt against the policies implemented by the European Union. Economic policies, migration policies. We're laying a first stone of a Europe of nations. A Europe that respects the nation's sovereignty and that respects the people's sovereignty.
Marine Le Pen's father, party founder Jean-Marie, laid his own wreath at a Paris statue of Joan of Arc. He sniped at his daughter for the direction she's tried to take the party over the last few years, a regular pastime after kicking him out for overt racism and trying to shed the National Front's far-right historical image.
I only regret that we no longer have the large popular march we had every year, that the National Front has gotten rid of, for reasons I obviously contest.
After her defeat in last year's presidential election and a poorer result in ensuing legislative votes than expected, party leader Marine Le Pen softened her tone somewhat when it comes to Europe. Gone is the rhetoric over scrapping the euro and pulling out of the EU, replaced with a desire to reform the political bloc into a club of nations working without federal control from Brussels. Le Pen is likely hoping for a boost from her European allies attending the Nice rally. From Austria, Germany and Italy to Poland, the Czech Republic and Greece, far-right nationalists have made inroads across the continent in elections over the last year, given domestic disappointment with more mainstream parties. Two notable no-shows at Tuesday's rally, though, the Netherlands' Geert Wilders and Italy's Matteo Salvini, both obliged to remain at home to handle legal matters. Despite their absence, they both wished Le Pen well, particularly as the continent's now just a year out from European parliamentary elections.
And where was President Emmanuel Macron on Labor Day? Well, he was very, very far away. He was on a state visit to Australia and then onto a maiden trip to the French overseas territory of New Caledonia, smack in the middle of the Pacific Oceans. And to some observers, Emmanuel Macron has taken a habit of traveling far away precisely when tensions are boiling at home. And then when the remark was put to him down under, he didn't take it well. Let's take a listen.
The 1st of May is a universal day. It's Workers' Day all over the world, but there aren't days off for a President of the Republic.
And those who accuse you of being so far away on this symbolic day?
It's a bad argument. Not to say it's totally unfounded, but my job is not to watch television and comment on the news. It's to take action for our country every day, everywhere. That's what I'm doing. Thank you.
Well, the president can seek some reassurance in a poll taken this week, showing that exactly a year after his surprise win in the presidential election, his support level remains at 45%, and that's higher than his predecessors, Nicolas Sarkozy and François Hollande, at that time of their mandate. And it's also slightly higher than his Prime Minister, Édouard Philippe, who remains at 44%, but has slipped 15% since the beginning of the year. Well, Emmanuel Macron wasn't born in May of 1968. 50 years ago, France was in the thrall of an unprecedented social movement, a mixture of youth liberation movement, labor protests that challenged the rule of General de Gaulle. It is now etched in the national memory. Let's take a look back half a century ago.
It began as a sit-in in the usually sleepy Paris University of Nanterre, but it quickly snowballed into weeks of violent unrest, some of the worst that France has seen. As workers downed tools en masse, growing numbers of students jumped on the bandwagon to voice their anger at the conservatism of the de Gaulle government. Sarah Makowski was a 20-year-old philosophy student at the Sorbonne when violence flared in May '68. She vividly remembers the moment when riot police moved in to clear the campus.
The police were walking up the Boulevard Saint-Michel in a big group, and we were hiding wherever we could. I remember I hid in the hall of a building, and what really hit me was the noise. Amid this incredible silence was the sound of boots on the tarmac. It was awful.
But 68 was as much a cultural as a political revolution. At the Beaux-Arts Art School in Paris, a new exhibition celebrating the posters and the slogans from 50 years ago has gone on display. But while these colourful cultural relics continue to draw in the crowds, some say the real spirit of 68 is slipping further and further away.
The street doesn't exist anymore. There isn't that culture of protest. People don't believe in it anymore. And then there's this disunity, which you see in lots of protests. If they're coming, I'm not going. Organizing something collective these days is a tall order.
Almost as quickly as the unrest flared, the barricades were dismantled and the flames of discontent died down. Even President de Gaulle, the man who so many had tried to push from power, went on to win at the polls. Yet 50 years on, another French leader is ruffling feathers. Some are even asking if May 2018 could be a repeat of May 68, as students hold fresh sit-ins and workers go on strike, this time in anger at President Macron's reform plans.
Well, clearly the president is hoping that he will not go through another May of 1968. And in the meantime, as I said earlier, he's visiting for the first time New Caledonia. And it's also an important moment. The Pacific territory is gearing up for a referendum on whether it wants to remain part of France or become independent. It is scheduled for later this year. And in addition, the trip corresponds with the 30th commemoration of a deadly clash between independentist militants and French security forces. Well, Macron has become the first ever English-speaking French president, showcasing his language skills many times, just recently in Washington by addressing Congress, and this week in Australia. But when he thanks the Australian Prime Minister and his wife, he betrayed his Gallic origins. Let's take a listen to the president making what he thought was a nice compliment.
But I wanted to thank you for your welcome. Thank you and your delicious wife for your warm welcome. It's the perfect organization of this trip. Thanks to you and Lucy. Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delicious wife, of course, works in French, but less so in English. He probably thought he was saying delightful wife. After the sound, we'll leave you with the images of Emmanuel Macron's trip down under.